Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Someone to Watch Over Me, which is episode 22 of season 5 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my Voyager user poll is Someone to Watch Over Me. So Someone to Watch Over Me is the episode where the Doctor decides to tutor 7 of 9 on how to date and have more of a love life, which is hilarity ensues. And then the Doctor makes a bet with Tom Paris that whether or not 7 of 9 will be ready to have an actual date that doesn't go horribly wrong by this conference from this visiting ambassador. And eventually the date does not go well for 7 of 9, but the Doctor decides to become her date for the event, and the date goes well. But when 7 of 9 finds out about the bet, she gets very upset with the Doctor, and the Doctor at this stage has fallen in love with 7 of 9, but he chickens out and refuses to tell her, and 7 of 9 decides to end her social lessons. So, I mentioned this episode on my channel many times before when discussing romances in Star Trek. So I guess this is a good place for me, as good as any place for me to start with this episode, because for me there's a key difference between Deep Space Nine and Voyager as far as romances go. And apparently not everyone shares this opinion because I get a lot of pushback on certain romances, which ones work, which ones don't. But in my opinion, I can see a clear difference, like objective difference, on how the producing and writing staff decide who will be in a relationship together. Now, first of all, I will say, like, some people are opposed to the whole idea of main characters in the Star Trek show getting together and having a relationship. I was thinking that's a bit sort of fan service-y, which, you know, the whole concept of shipping and whatnot, and would prefer that they avoid it altogether, which was avoided in the original series entirely. Until we get into the reboot films, but we'll talk about that. And then Next Generation mostly avoided this. There was an underpinning sort of, there was a form, like the whole show began with Riker and Troy having had a romance before the events of the show, so there was always this underpinning romance between the two of them, but it wasn't, you know, they touched on it once in a while, but it wasn't fully blossomed into a full-on romantic relationship until the movies. And there was also an underpinning of Picard and Crusher, which was touched on a few times in the first season, but then, you know, mostly ignored for the bulk of the series, maybe touched on once or twice, and it wasn't until the final season where they revisited it, but it never actually fully accumulated into anything, except for in the final episode, All Good Things, there was this possible future where you know, Jean-Luc and Beverly had apparently been married and then divorced. But again, so that's why I wouldn't say it. That's why I would say that Next Generation didn't really, I mean, it kind of toyed with it a bit, but it didn't really do full-on relationships, particularly the way that Deep Space Nine and Voyager did. As Deep Space Nine and Voyager both had a couple of main characters marry each other. I think I misquoted once saying that Worf and Dax were the only two main characters to marry each other in the Star Trek show, but then I forgot about B'Elanna Torres and Tom Paris. But I do believe Dax and Worf were first. But anyway, so Deep Space Nine and Voyager, the two shows I would compare in the romantic relationships. And again, this is my opinion, a lot of people disagree with this. I think I like the way Deep Space Nine handles romantic relationship between main characters, and I hate the way Voyager does. Now, again, a lot of people will disagree with certain relationships, like, because the main ones in Deep Space Nine, and I'm talking about between main characters, I'm not talking about recurring characters or guest stars, so I'm not counting Rom or Lita or Minister Shakar or Baral, any of those fuckers. I mean, two main characters. And so the main ones there are Worf and Dax, Odo and Kira, and Ezri, Dax, and Julian Bashir, which they did at the very end. Oh yeah, Next Generation, I forgot to mention Worf and Troy, but that's better forgotten anyway. Anyway, so yeah, with Deep Space Nine, yeah, it was mainly those three between main characters. Again, I'm not counting the reoccurring characters. And I like them all. I think they all worked, and this is where I meet disagreement, because I heard a lot of people actively despise the Odo and Kira pairing. They thought it didn't work. I humbly disagree. I think there are some cases where the writers didn't handle it very well, and it didn't quite work, and the actors weren't sure how to handle it. I will grant, but there are other cases where it was amazing and it really shined, and it has a concept overall. I thought it really, really worked. And then Worf and Dax, also, I thought, again, the same situation. You got let He Who Is Without Sin was a horrible example of their relationships, and some people thought that didn't work. But there are other episodes and other examples where I thought the Worf and Dax relationship actually extremely worked very well. Oh yeah, I'm forgetting about O'Brien and Keiko, but they were already married in Next Generation when they were minor characters. So again, and plus Keiko was a recurring character anyway. So anyway, I'm still focusing on those three. And plus, Keiko was introduced as the wife character, in the same way Cassidy Yates was introduced as the girlfriend character of Benjamin Sisko, which is, again, why I'm not including here. Anyway, and then there's also Ezri and Julian, which I sometimes feel I'm the only one who likes that relationship, but I will fight tooth and nail for that relationship. I think it was brilliant. I was so happy when they paired them together, and I thought it worked. Now, a lot of people were against it because they thought, Julian had a crush for Jadzia, so this is kind of a faulty relationship where they're just the two of them. He's just projecting his feelings for someone else onto a different person, which I actually very strongly disagree with. I think that Julie and Ezri are very similar. They're both sort of geeky and shy in their own way. In fact, the penultimate episode where they're kind of flirting with each other, I thought beautifully illustrated why these two are perfect for each other. Now, apparently, there was a novelist who wrote novels that took place after Deep Space Nine, and apparently they were in the camp that this was that they were a bad couple, so they immediately broke them up, which pissed me off personally. But the actual showrunners, or just the writers of the show, were on my side, because when they pitched this possible fictional season 8 during their documentary, that took place like decades after Deep Space Nine ended, Ezri and Julian were still together. Anyway, so I know, as I said, not everyone agreed, but I agreed, and I loved, and I think all the main couples of Deep Space Nine worked. Voyager, on the other hand, I think all of the main couples of main characters failed and did not work. Now, the main one on Voyager is B'Elanna and Tom, and I know of several prominent YouTubers who love this coupling and think it was amazing and it worked very well. I humbly disagree. I think it's farcical, and I never bought it, and I think it kind of ruined both characters in a way. That both characters were more interesting before they put them together, and once they were together, they kind of retconned the characters to be totally different people who were no longer interesting. Particularly B'Elanna, I think she was a very independent, strong engineer type, and I think putting in a relationship with Tom kind of gutted her character a bit and made her just the girlfriend of the pilot. I know, not everyone agrees. Plus, I think they had zero. And here's the thing. All right, wait, hold on. Before I get to the thing, I'll get to the thing shortly. But the other couple in Voyager is Chakotay and 709. Now, if I'm going to count Julian and Ezri, and I mentioned Worf and Dax, Troy and Dax, I also had to count Chakotay and 709. Because those are all examples of couples that were put together pretty much for the final episode of the show. They were like teased shortly before. Actually, yeah, all three of them were teased shortly before, but they coupled in the finale. And the less said about Chakotay 709 is better. I don't know if anyone, I think I might have gotten one comment in my entire life. Is the only time I've actually heard of someone who liked this couple. Throughout the entire internet, people I've met, reviews, YouTubers, professional people I met in real life, everyone thought this was a shambles, that this was a disgrace, and that this couple, including the actors, by the way, actually maybe not the one who played Chakotay, but whatever. he of course he's not going to complain about being put in a couple with someone hot like Jay Ryan. But a lot of the writers and other people involved with the show admit that this was a mistake. And also, and this time I agreed with the novelist, when a novelist wrote a Voyager book that took place after the show, they immediately broke up Chakotay and 709. In that case, I was like, yep. Because, oh my god, yeah, I did a whole 20-minute section on my in-game review, which was an hour and a half long, where I dissected just how terrible this coupling was. And again, I reasserted the couplings in Deep Space Nine I liked, and I got so much pushback. Oh, I don't like Ezra and Bashir. I don't like Troy, Odo and Kira. I don't think they work. Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to mock, because those are fair opinions if you want to have it. I just very strongly disagree with that. I think they all worked. And the Voyager ones, particularly, like the Chakotay and 709 is one of the most disgraceful couplings in all of television, not just Star Trek. That is definitely something best forgotten. And to be fair, the B'Elanna and Tom isn't quite as horrible. But, yeah, I never liked it either. Now, you could also say, well, there's one coupling I'm skipping over, and that's Kes and Neelix, which I don't really want to get into. And that's kind of different because they began the series as a couple. It's kind of a O'Brien-Keiko thing, even though these are both main characters. A lot of people didn't like it, where I did in fact like it, but as I said, I have to make a whole nother video just about them. Because there's a whole discussion to have against, Ocampan years versus human years. I think a lot of people are judging Ocampan years the way they would judge human years, which I think is a misnomer. I'm sorry, Cass is in her 20s, essentially. But anyway, and Neelix is in his 30s, so what? It's not anyway. That's, as I said, that's a discussion for another time. But that's different. So that's kind of the outlier where I actually liked the couple, but then of course they broke them up shortly after, which I didn't like. Anyway, here's that I mentioned before, there was an objective difference between the way Deep Space Nine handled their romantic relationships and the objective way that Voyager handled the romantic relationships. And now I'm finally getting to the point that brings it back to this episode, is that the difference is Deep Space Nine didn't say like beforehand, I want to put Ezri and Julian together, or I want to put Jadzia and Worf together. They write the characters, and it's particularly Kira and Odo, like that was never planned. They write the characters, and then out of the stories, and they notice a natural chemistry between the performers and the characters, the way they're written, that these two characters would seem like they'd be good together. And so they say, there's natural chemistry. Let's build off of the natural chemistry, particularly the Worf and Jadzia. That was never planned in advance. They just noticed as they were writing the episodes how well these two characters jived. And I thought, hey, it would make a lot of sense to put these two characters together. And I believe they did that in all three instances, which is the opposite of how Voyager handled it. Because Voyager, instead of building off of natural chemistry that already existed, they purposely ignored it and instead decreed that the producers or our studio heads were decreed, let's put these two characters together, even though they never had any natural chemistry. That's the difference between the romantic relationships in Deep Space Nine and the romantic relationships in Voyager, and that's why the ones in Voyager don't work. Now, you might say with the Tom and B'Elanna, they did kind of tease the relationship a bit. Yeah, no, in Season 3, Tom and B'Elanna had zero interaction or zero chemistry before Season 3, and it was obvious Season 3 is when they decided, let's throw these two characters together. And to be fair to them, at least they built up to it and didn't just immediately smash them together. But even so, I still think it didn't work, and I never bought any of their teasing, their building of the relationship, because it came out of nowhere and there was no existing chemistry between these characters. And it makes no sense for Tom Paris's character to be in a long-term relationship. It would have made way more sense for Harry Kim. There was existing chemistry between Harry Kim and B'Elanna from the very first episode, and instead of building off of what was already there, they instead decree that two characters go together. Now, finally, this episode. This is what this episode does. This episode is doing the Deep Space Nine thing of building off of existing chemistry that already exists between the Doctor and Seven of Nine, and it does it beautifully. Where they go wrong, however, and this is, I don't know if I have any concrete sources for this, but from what I heard, the writers of this episode rightfully wanted this episode to end with the Doctor and 7-9 becoming a couple, but this Rick Berman or the studio heads or someone overruled them and said no, you're not allowed to, and thus they weren't a couple. Instead, later on, they decree that 7 of 9 and Chakotay become a couple, even though they had absolutely zero chemistry, and that coupling was a complete and utter failure. And that's why the ones in Deep Space Nine worked, because they didn't just decree, let's put these two characters together because this one's not getting enough screen time and this one's hot, or these two are hot. Instead of decreeing, let's put these two random characters together, the writers naturally say, look at the performances, they look at the characters as written, they look at the past and see, they have this natural chemistry, which let's build off it naturally and bring it to a more sort of stronger conclusion, and that's why they work. And this is what this episode does, because the Doctor and 7 of 9, from season 4, from the very start, they had a natural chemistry together, and they were two unique, and it's a very interesting pairing too, because they're very two unique characters. One, of course, a hologram, and the other, someone a Borg. And I think this episode portrays the similarities between them perfectly, because it illustrates the Doctor guides 7 of 9 into a social life, into socializing with people. And at first, Tom Paris says, talk about the blind leading the blind, because the Doctor was infamous for having no bedside manner and no sort of social grace whatsoever. But that was in the first couple seasons. And in fact, so he actually learned to develop more of a social life and more grace, social grace. He also became a bit of egotist. I don't know what was that, who likes to talk too much, but he still grew, so it actually made him the perfect candidate to guide 709 because from personal experience, he was, basically a fully functional Starfleet officer or member of the crew, I should say, because 709 is not a Starfleet officer, but a fully functioning adult member of the crew who is basically had no concept of what it was to socialize with other people and had to learn it on the fly, which is exactly what 709 has to do. So it's actually he was actually the perfect person to show. And plus, even if Tom Parrish's comment about the blind leading the blind could refer to romantic encounters, the Doctor even points out that he has had several romantic encounters before, referring to episodes like Heroes and Demons, or more prominently the second season episode with that Vidian woman. Oh God, I can't remember the name of the episode, but you know the one I'm talking about. It was actually a really good episode, and then she reappeared later, and it was a really, really strong romantic episode. So he has had some experience with romance, and so and the interactions between 709 and the Doctor are golden. And this is why it works so well, because what I was saying before, because they're building off of existing chemistry. And it's funny because Brennan Braga and Rick Berman have both quoted this as one of their favorite episodes, as they really loved it. However, going back to that background knowledge, Rick Berman, even though loved this episode, refused to fucking carry this relationship on further. So apparently he likes it only as a standalone thing, which... See, I compare, this episode, looking at this episode, especially in general, just season 4 and 5, to the character growth of 709 in season 7, which I think was a disaster. In particular, there was the episode I think of the most is one in season 7 that also explores 709 trying to explore more of a romantic relationship in her social life. This is one called Human Error, where she's exploring her social skills or dating skills with a hologram of Chakotay. And how terrible that episode is compared to this episode, and how really they kind of messed up 709's character development in later seasons, and how in season 4 and 5, and maybe a little bit in season 6, they did a really good job of exploring this character, showing this character explore her humanity and what it means to be human. And it seems like this was a natural next step for exploring sort of more romantic relationships. And in the final season, they just botched it, and they made it really boring and unbelievable and uninteresting. I'm sorry. And I feel like, that's because I feel like part of it is because they purposely avoided what was natural and what made sense by having this stupid ending where nothing becomes of this relationship. And I had gotten a comment the other day that said that they thought that the Doctor and 709 didn't work as a couple and would have been dumb. Which again, everyone has their opinion, and I respect it, and they're entitled to it. But watching this episode, I can't understand that opinion though, because I think this episode is the most convincing selling point as to why this relationship really, really worked. And really, really would have worked had they continued it more long term. By the way, this episode's far superior to the Odo and Kira one with Vic Fontaine and Deep Space Nine. Far superior. Anyway, because you could see even though 709 never acknowledged or to herself or was ever aware that she had feelings for the Doctor, but you could see her naturally becoming closer to him and naturally relying on him. I think the line that sort of draws us out the most is when she was talking about how difficult it was doing this date with this random guy, because she's like, this is nothing. I don't like this form of communication. It's nothing like the way you and I talking to the doctor. It's nothing like the way you and I talk. It's a lot more I can't remember her exact wording, but she was like, it's a lot easier. And the doctors just dismissed it. It was like, oh, that's just because we're just friends. And I think that's his way of sort of avoiding this, trying to be dismissive of it. And I think 7 of 9 subconsciously was. And also you got to understand, she doesn't comprehend romantic relationships. She doesn't understand what they are, and the doctor is explaining, oh, it's going on these dates and the chance meeting, like. And this is what I love, because in a way it kind of is the blind leading the blind, because the doctor is just going off of like romantic comedies or whatnot on how basically reading a textbook on how to date and how people meet, and not the sort of natural development or natural chemistry that goes beyond these surface rituals. And so 7 of 9 is being taught by someone who doesn't fully understand the depth that goes on underneath it, and so she herself doesn't understand it either. And I think subconsciously she was picking up on how the doctor would be a better companion for her, but she didn't understand that because she was being told that dating and romance consists of these rituals of going out to dinner and being polite and being like, would you care for a dance, and stuff like that. And so that's why I think this part of the reason why I think that this episode made the best argument as to why this couple it would have been a really interesting couple too. Like, I could imagine all the great storylines that they could have had with these two being in the couple, but instead in season 7 you turn it into a unrecorded love situation, which I think was actually much worse. I mean, and they kind of did this with Harry Kim in 7 of 9 already, and it just makes the doctor a bit seem pathetic, and they try to play jokes off of it, like the doctor constantly creeping off of 7, and when the doctor finally explains, proclaims his love to 7 in the penultimate episode, Renaissance Man, is an episode I have a lot of issues with. 7 of 9 rejects him outright because she's already in love with Chakotay. God damn it. And again, no. And so I think what they did do with these feelings that they really beautifully and masterfully crafted in this episode, what they ultimately ended up doing failed and was a farce. And I do think it all was driven because whoever it was, studio head or whatever, blocked them from doing what would actually make the most sense naturally. And so that's very frustrating. And that is what differs Deep Space Nine from Voyager, because Deep Space Nine, notoriously, it did have some studio overview, like they did reel in Ira Stephen Bear when he wanted to do that horrible ending where Deep Space Nine was all in Benny Russell's head, which was the dumbest thing ever. In that case, I could very much commend Rick Berman for saying, no, you can't do that. But for the most part, Deep Space Nine had more free reign, and I think that's most apparent in the romantic relationships. Whereas Voyager was a lot, since it was the network show out of the two, had a lot more studio and producer scrutiny. And I think overall, not just in terms of romantic characters, but in terms of overall storytelling and overall story arcs, it was to the detriment of Voyager. And it's why Voyager is the main reason why, in fact, I will be as bold to say, is why Voyager is not as good as Deep Space Nine, because of too much studio interference. And I think that's also very relevant here. Now, apparently, the studios did allow them to do this one episode, but wouldn't allow them to do more, which is very frustrating. And Jerry Ryan herself said that she loved this episode and she liked performing it, but she hated the scene where the doctor came and professed his love, and it was turned out to just be a hologram of Seven, not the real Seven. And she hated that. She said that she wished that that it was real, that they would have gone into a relationship. And I've seen footage of conventions where because there's a strong, even though there's some people who would disagree, there's a strong fan base, a strong following of people who wanted the Doctor and Seven of Nine together, which makes perfect sense to me because, as I said, this episode is the perfect argument for that, and I can see why it would convince a strong number of people of why this should have happened. And so years later, after Voyager ended, I saw footage of a convention where one of those fans went up to Jerry Ryan and asked, a question or whatever, and said that how they wished that the Doctor and Seven of Nine would have became a couple, and how that would have made a lot of sense. And Jerry Ryan agreed. She said, "I totally agree. I think I agree that these two characters should have been together." And because as an actor, she's more concerned of what works for her character and what's natural for her own character, and she could clearly see that this made a lot of sense, and that there was chemistry between these two characters, and it really worked. Whereas, the producers didn't give a shit about that. They just went, "No, we don't decree these two characters together. We decree that she be with Chakotay because he needs more screen time." Which is not how you do good storytelling. So I myself find the ending of this episode extremely frustrating, especially with that background knowledge. But even before I had that background knowledge, it pissed me off. And more than that, it is a very stereotypical romantic comedy cliche. You have someone who has a crush on someone, and they come up and they confess, "Oh, I love you," and the other person's like, reacts, "Oh, you love me," and it just turns out to be a dream or daydream or hallucination, and in real life they just fumble, "Oh, I can't tell you, I'm too shy." And there's some realism to that, obviously, but the way it's been portrayed in film and television throughout the years turned into a goofy cliche. And moreover, and sometimes I will say it does work, because sometimes the object of the person's affection, getting 7 of 9 slip there, sometimes the object of the person's affections definitely would never return it. So it was an unrealistic thing. However, that is not the case here. As I just explained, this episode actually didn't make an argument on why the Doctor would fall in love with 7 of 9. It made a strong argument as to why 7 of 9 would want to be in a romantic relationship with the Doctor. And that's why turning into an unrequited love situation failed. And that's why Jerry Ryan thought that the two should have went together, because she could clearly see that. Because from 7 of 9's perspective, like, the Doctor is someone who actually cared for her more and was actually being kind and showing her how to relate with people, and so it would make all the sense of the world that he would be her through. But instead, someone involved with the show seemed obsessed with making the Doctor an egotist who's just stuck up on his own ass. And I always, again, getting back into Endgame was the worst thing that Voyager ever did. I remember the scene where they had the possible future where the Doctor ends up with some random blonde hot chick. And I remember reading some blogs at the time that came out saying that this is disgraceful. You just put the Doctor with some random bimbo and it's supposed to make us happy. No, the Doctor should have been with 7 of 9. And I gotta agree. I do have to agree. And that was kind of a sham way to kind of just throw breadcrumbs at the people who were disappointed that this relationship never happened. It's like, "Oh, don't worry about the Doctor. He's going to end up with some random hot chick." No, we don't want to see the Doctor with some random hot chick. We want to see the Doctor with a character he had natural chemistry with a relationship that would be really interesting and dynamic, and you refuse to do that for political reasons rather than creative or storytelling reasons. And that's bad storytelling. Anyway, I think I hammered that point down enough. Let me talk about more about specifics about the episode. One of my favorite scenes is I love. This is why it's such a great episode, because I love the scene where how it opens with 709 like observing B'Elanna and Tom, and B'Elanna of course gets really pissed off about it, and 709 had all these notes about when and it's written sort of in a scientific way about the flower species aphilia, and it was like subject A and subject B engage in intimate relations, and how B'Elanna Torres gets really pissed off. It's like, how the hell do you know when we engage in intimate relations? And 709's response is, I don't think there's anyone on deck 23 that doesn't know when you don't engage in intimate relations. Which is funny, but I gotta believe in the 24th century, and a starship where they have material that can protect people from space, and energy fields that can protect ship from any external radiation, and energy weapons and stuff, that they would have walls thick enough to keep sound in so that everyone wouldn't hear when people were having intimate relations. So, I mean, it's a funny line, but it's done at the expense of believability, in my opinion. Also brings me back to my flatting days when I used to have roommates, but the good old days. Anyway, but I think the reason why this episode works in the relationship, the way Seven is betrayed works, is because the way they portray her has I said, completely ignorant of what it means. Like, she didn't understand how that would be offensive to B'Elanna. She's looking at it more the way she would have a scientific study. In fact, I love her conversation with Janeway, because she's actually perplexed. Like, she's confused on why people have an issue with this. She's like, well, I thought you wanted me to study, like, social life on the ship and human social interactions. And Janeway's like, yeah, I'm not questioning your motives, I'm questioning your methods. Like, it's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it. That's the issue. And that was a beautiful conversation. And then let me talk about the date she goes on, and how she like selects like a random person from the crew. This is another hard sell for me, something that I think balks at believability, and I kind of have to suspend disbelief a bit. That because the guy that she chose is a bad choice. And so it's hard for me to believe that her and the doctor get together. I guess maybe it could show just how, much they think they know about romantic relationship, but they don't really. That they would painstakingly go through the crew to try to find 709 a date, and they come up with like someone who's so wrong. And Tom Paris even points that out. He's like, "What? You chose Chapman?" And he's right. And so it is hard for me to believe. And like, even again, it's kind of funny when 709 is talking to Harry Kim, and she's mentioning how she's looking for a date, and she tells about her interests, one of them being music, and Harry Kim's like, I play the clarinet, and 709's just like, you're not one of the options. Like, that's funny, but I can't help but think that Harry Kim would have been a way better option than this Chapman guy. Again, I guess it could show how flawed the Doctor and 709 are in their picking process, but it's more the point of, like, they teased this whole Harry Kim 709 thing in the early fourth season, and they abandoned it, so I can see how they wouldn't want to go back to it. But and it is cool that Harry was more there to give Seven advice, but he would have made a way better date. And also, like, when 709 narrowed it down to these two people, the other one, Harry Kim, was like, oh, he has no sense of humor. And I when I watched it this time, I said, wait a second. that actually makes him a better option for 709, not a worse, because 709 has no sense of humor either. And so it seemed like, and it's just from the picture, hard to tell from a picture, but it seemed like he was a more steady, sturdy fella than the Chapman guy, the guy who's very nervous and as Tom Paris said, he was one of the absolute worst choice. It's still, I can't even, no, it's too hard for me to believe that 709 and the Doctor could fuck up so badly and choose one of the absolute worst options on the entire ship. It seemed like that other dude who had no sense of humor would have been a lot better. I mean, he plays the accordion badly. And I think that should eliminate pretty much anyone from from being an option dating. But still, it seems like he would have been the better choice. And it's hard for me to buy. And, you know, the actual date that they had where, you know, she rips the lobster. This creature has an exoskeleton. It's good humor. But it's just hard for me to buy that they would actually pick someone who's absolutely so bad. But that's kind of, it's so the show could happen. And so they could get the point A to point B, because they want the date to fail so that she could end up going with the Doctor to the reception. But it was really contrived on how they got there. I mean, and also, again, I just don't like, I kind of already talked about it, but I don't like how the Doctor kind of failed. I don't like that ending at all. The ending kind of ruins the episode a bit for me. I think it would have been way better because that scene where they were showing the Doctor saying, you know, this week we spent was memorable. You've been a light of my life, and 709 realizing you have romantic feelings for me. Like, that was a beautiful scene, and they ruined it by saying, oh, it's just a holodeck, and then the Doctor kind of fizzing out and not being able. Now, it's not that I don't buy the Doctor would sort of cower out and not do it. I buy that. I mean, that makes sense for his character, but it's less interesting. It would have been far more interesting, and I do believe that, as I said, I remember reading something, that's what the writers wanted to do. That scene that took place in the holodeck was supposed to be a real life scene, but it was the studio heads that came in and said, make that a holodeck and make him fizzle out and not do it in real life. And it ruins the episode. It ruins it! Anyway, sorry. Let's get into the B plot. I didn't like the B plot. I'll just flat out say that. I thought the B plot was dumb. It reminded me a lot of another dumb episode from Next Generation, Liaisons, where these ambassadors come on board and they're proving really difficult. Like, this one dude just wants to eat, and so it reminds me of this guy. But also the other ambassador who just wanted to be a dick to Worf and made Worf's life, you know, he didn't know how to handle it because he was supposed to be nice to us. It's kind of a combination of the two. And the side plot, if you don't remember, is this really religious species who are really uptight and religious, not allowed any sort of pleasures or freedom. They're doing trade with them, and Janeway and Tuvok are going off to the world, and the ambassador staying behind on Voyager, and Neelix is supposed to, like, shadow him, but he immediately wants to indulge in every pleasure imaginable, which, to be fair, I think that makes sense. And I've noticed that from my personal experience and observations that people from more restrictive religious cultures tend to want to indulge more in sort of you know, pleasures and stuff that they're not supposed to indulge in, and it usually they do it more recklessly and poorly because they've been restricted from doing it, which is why on principle I'm against those kind of restrictive cultures, and I think it's bad for human development in general, but that's just my opinion. So it makes sense from that perspective, but it's not very interesting, and I didn't find it very funny. And it's obvious they were trying to be funny, especially that's when Neelix is freaking out because the guy was like drunk off his ass. And Neelix is like, oh my god, Janeway's returning in a day, what am I supposed to do? And Chakotay is like, pray! And I kind of laughed at that because they were being a bit too melodramatic, especially Chakotay, the way he went, pray! I'm like, come on, calm down, Chakotay. It's not the end of the fucking world. The dude's drunk, so what? And then the scene where he makes an ass out of himself and like comes on the 709, she rejects him. That was so, and he just falls and collapses. Like, I didn't like that. Anyway, my rating for Someone to Watch Over Me out of 10. I think previously I've given this episode a 9. I'm actually going to give this episode an 8. I talked myself down from a 9 to an 8, and two main reasons for that. An 8, extremely good, for the record. Now, two main reasons why I talked myself down. First of all, that ending. This episode could have been a 10, possibly, without that ending. That ending does bring it down at least 1 point, where the studio interfered with natural creative processes. So fuck them for that. And 2, the B storyline with the ambassador, it was dumb. So those two factors bring it from a 9 to an 8, but it's still a really good episode. I still highly enjoy it. I still think it was one of the best. I would probably go as far to say that it is the singular best romantic comedy episode that Star Trek has ever done. Now, not straight out romance. That season 2 episode with the doctor I mentioned earlier was a better romance episode, but it wasn't really a romantic comedy, even though there were some comedic elements to the episode. It wasn't the best romance episode, but that one wasn't a comedy. So this, I think, is the best romantic comedy. The chemistry, the humor, everything about the A storyline, at least, really worked, even though there were some stretches of believability with them choosing that idiot to date. But it was still a highly enjoyable episode. I just wish that ending wasn't so frustrating. So that's it for my review of Someone to Watch Over Me. Be sure to check out my channel, as I cover many more Star Trek videos, as well as videos on other shows like The Expanse, Better Call Saul, The Outer Limits, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.